Tom Meyer is a professor of Bible and theology at the Shasta Bible College and Graduate School in California. He believes that archaeology, combined with the other knowledge we possess today, can help validate many stories in the Bible. Better known as the Bible Memory Man, it's a pleasure to welcome back Tom Meyer to The Land and the Book. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thanks for having me.
And we always have a fun time when you're around somehow. I don't know what it is, but it's always a pleasure. So you suggested that clues have come to light that pinpoint the exact location where the Ark of the Covenant once stood. First, let me ask you to review its role in Israeli worship at the temple, this Ark of the Covenant.
Sure. Well, as most of the listeners know, Moses was given the instructions by Yahweh in Exodus chapter 25 to construct this chest. And chests like this, sacred chests, were not uncommon in the ancient Near East. Howard Carter, the archaeologist, discovered a chest in King Tut's tomb that instead of having two cherubim on top, it had Anubis, the god of the dead. So these chests weren't uncommon, but what was uncommon about the Ark of the Covenant is not only what it held inside, its contents with the tablets of the law, as your audience knows, the jar of manna and the staff of Aaron, but this was the seat where Yahweh dwelt inside of the Holy of Holies between those two cherubim, and this is where Moses would go in and lift up that veil that he had and commune with Yahweh. And so it was above and beyond anything that had ever been up to that point. I mean, talk about powerful. I mean, when the Israelite army marched into battle with the Ark of Covenant ahead of them, you know the stories in 1 Samuel. The people, they fell like flies. Mm-hmm. So this holy chest is right up there in like the top 5 greatest archaeological discoveries yet to be discovered.
Yet on a purely physical level, we're talking about a wooden box that was about 4.5 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, not exactly impressive at first glance. And I think it's important to distinguish between the fact that the Ark itself did not possess power. It was God's presence, God's power, choosing to focus over periods of time on that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're exactly right. You hit the nail right on the head. And it was, like you mentioned, made of acacia wood. And it would have had these thin plates of gold, the equivalent of nailed to it. And then the top portion, what we would call today the mercy seat, that was made of, as you know, solid gold with the two cherubim stretching out or covering the glory of God on top of it. And that theme of the two angels protecting the glory of God, it even goes before the ark in Genesis chapter 3 when he drove out the man and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubim to kind of guard the tree of life. And then also later when Jesus is risen from the dead, you have two angels right at each side of the place where he was laying. So there is just this idea where these cherubim kind of function like these guardians or protectors of the glory of God. And it's seen perfectly on the Ark of the Covenant.
You know, another story associated with the Ark of the Covenant is an incident where it was being recovered and it was on a flatbed cart pulled by oxen. At a point, they come to some unsteady ground and one of those nearest to it reaches out to steady the thing so it doesn't fall and boom, is instantly killed. A lot of people find that extraordinarily unfair and harsh of God. I think it speaks, though, to the expectancy that God has for absolute obedience. And I think maybe our lack of true appreciation for the holiness, the otherness of God. What are we missing in this story, Tom, with the Ark of the Covenant?
Well, I think among other things, off the top of my head, it's someone trying to do the right thing in the wrong way. And instead of obeying the exact words of the law which Moses gave, they were trying to help God, but doing it in their own way.
Yeah.
And of course that resulted in a terrible thing, and that was the death of that person who really was trying to do the right thing, but It was the wrong way.
Yeah. And I think sometimes in our culture we're really into chill. We're into relaxed. We're into, sipping a caramel macchiato as we entertain worship songs in church. I think maybe we've just gotten too casual, and that kind of filters our understanding of Scripture. Your thoughts? Yeah,
we in the West, in the 21st century, we live in a padded, not that there's anything wrong with it, but a padded, maybe there is, a padded pew, PowerPoint, hand sanitizer around every corner, orange mocha frappuccinos in the foyers with gluten-free cupcake kind of, Sunday morning world. And that's pretty much the opposite of the hot, dusty, bloody, illegal, persecuted, on-the-run first-century church, which actually might be coming our way sooner than later. But we forget how bloody, don't we? How bloody our religion, our faith is. It's the bloodiest religion of them all, because as you know, without the shedding of blood, there's no forgiveness of sins. And so we do, because we live in that bubble, especially now in that sanitized world we live in, we forget that kind of earthy kind of nature of the pages of the Old Testament and the early church. And there's something, when I lived in the Holy Land, I lived out in the wilderness with the Bedouin for a short period of time, and I was able to befriend a sheep and make a long story short, we slaughtered that sheep and we ate that sheep, and there's just something powerful about that. Kind of like with the Passover lamb.
Yes.
With the Passover lamb, how it would be in the people's house and they would inspect it and take care of it and the kids would bond with it. And then now we have to slaughter it and eat it. So there is something powerful to that.
Tom Meyer from the Shasta Bible College and Graduate School in California is helping us understand the significance of the Ark of the Covenant in modern archaeology. You suggested that clues have come to light that pinpoint its exact location, where it would have stood. So why should this be a discussion even? I mean, what's the big deal, some people might say, with its actual placement? Who cares?
Well, that's a great question. And the reason it's so important is because we live in a world where not only is the Holocaust denied by many people, but you have like the top brass and the Palestinian muftis of Jerusalem saying things like, there's no indication that a Jewish temple was ever on this place. In the whole city, there was never even a single stone that indicates Jewish history, and the Temple Mount was never here. There's zero proof to establish that. So much so that these kind of ideas are cropping up. It's causing people to write books left and right to destroy this fake news. And so to be able to demonstrate through the Temple Mount Sifting Project and to be able to demonstrate through the clues that are out there that the Ark of the Covenant really was once here, under the Dome of the Rock, it helps establish the authority and the reliability and the accuracy of the Word of God.
Well, why now? What's new or recently discovered that would lead us to the conclusion that you've reached?
Well, I'd like to say that I'm not the only one who holds this position, but to make a long story short, it goes back to around the turn of the last century, about 1900, 1910, somewhere in that time frame. There was a German scholar named Gustav Dahlmann, and your audience would have loved him. He traveled around the Holy Land, and he took 15,000 pictures way back 100 years ago before the Industrial Revolution really got roaring in that part of the world. And there were still windows into the past. You can get off the beaten track, and nothing had really changed in the last 2,000 years for the most part. But he was really the last person to get access into that Dome of the Rock and to measure and to inspect the place where the Holy of Holies once was and the Ark of the Covenant once stood.
So what kind of traction has this story been given over in Israel, in the press there? Is it a big item online and in Israeli media?
Well, that's an excellent question. And as someone who lived in the Holy Land for 5 years, I was able really to kind of like rub shoulders with and pick the brains of the people that live there. And I know that there's, really not a lot of trust in polls, but one of the most recent poll there found that over 40% of religious Jews and over a third of secular Jews, they wanted the immediate reconstruction of the temple. And that's pretty amazing. And 60% of the Jews that were there believe that Jews should be allowed to go up today and pray on the Temple Mount. So there's this momentum building that Dome of the Rock that's been here for the last 1,300 years that is illegally occupying what is actually ours. And we have evidence that it is ours through things like the Temple Mount Sifting Project, through things like the clues that are left behind on what's called the Rock, under the Dome of the Rock, that certainly shows that the Ark of the Covenant really was right there. That is X marks the spot.
So given that this discovery only serves to validate Jewish historical claims to the land, Why does this rock impression still exist? I mean, why haven't Muslims removed it or somehow minimized it?
Well, that's a good question. And it has been altered to a certain degree over the ages, for sure. During the Crusader period of the 12th to 13th centuries, you can tell how they were kind of, how can I put it, needed cash really bad. So what they did is they excavated small parts, small slivers of that rock that was the Holy of Holies floor at one time. And they sold those rocks for the equivalent of their weight in gold to help finance their campaigns. And they dug a chimney in that area on the Dome of the Rock, because underneath it is a place called the Well of Souls, where, not from the movie, but where people would pray. And so the candle and the smoke could come out. But thanks to Gustav Dahlmann's work, and thanks to modern-day pictures, and thanks to modern-day archaeologists and researchers like Lane Rittmeyer, we can see where the scarps were, the walls of the Holy of Holies once were, and they're 20 cubits apart, just like the Bible states. And we can see things like the basin where the Ark of the Covenant once stood. It's right there. There's a depression in the ground that's 1.5 cubits by 2.5 cubits, which is exactly in the center of the Dome of the Rock, which was built right over the Holy of Holies. And that's the exact dimensions of the Ark. And they would have made a basin or a depression to put the Ark in, because, as you know, that area is, for among other things, it's earthquake-ridden, like, in the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, and you don't want that Ark to tip over.
Right.
So in that kind of like moon-like surface, that threshing floor that was originally worn on the Jebusites, which David bought, that threshing floor was uneven. So in order to make it where it wouldn't tip over for any reason, they built that little depression, which you can still see today.
So how can Christians use this discovery to launch conversations with their Muslim friends that are kind and informed rather than confrontational? Real quick.
Well, that's a good question. On the one hand, it's an uphill battle because it says inside the Dome of the Rock that God has no son. So that's kind of a difficult hurdle to get past. But you can demonstrate through the physical evidence that there's this incontrovertible connection to this rock and the pages of the Old Testament. And you can show that you see where these marks are? These are 20 cubits apart. This is the exact dimensions of the Holy of Holies. Do you see how in the middle of that there's a depression or a basin that's the exact size of the Ark of the Covenant? There really was a Jewish temple here, and the Bible really is true, and God really does have a son, and he loves you.
Love it. Thank you for that conversation. Always a pleasure to have Tom Meyer with us from Shasta Bible College. Charlie Dyer's up next. His look at your questions on the land and the book. Stick around.